interested in announcing?
I really didn't get involved into the sport until I was 11 or 12 years old. So when Leamington reopened in 2013, just kind of went out to support it. And I kind of got hooked on the sport, and I loved the action of it. And I would take programs and pretend I was announcing races and announce them off of TV. So I just loved the excitement of the race call. And then I would kind of record myself and bring it in. So just the storytelling of it, I love that aspect of it.
I got involved in announcing basically because the regular announcer at Kingston Park Raceway was also the anchor for the 6 o'clock news, and he couldn't make it to the racetrack in time to call the first race. So my theory was, no matter how bad I was at the time, I was better than dead air.
Well, I was always interested in sports, and I was supposed to be a hockey announcer. I was very close to being the play-by-play announcer for a team in the Ontario Hockey League, and then at the last minute I changed my mind. So later, when the horse racing possibility came up, I just said, I want to do it.
What got me interested in announcing was, when I was a young kid, whether you're a hockey fan, you imitate other hockey announcers. I kind of did the same thing. I was a harness racing fan, and, you sit around and announce races, trying to imitate other announcers that you looked up to or you enjoyed listening to. So that's kind of how it started, by doing that. And then when an opportunity came and a position was available, people said, yeah, you should give that a try. You're pretty good at, imitating other announcers. So then it was on to moving on and creating your own style and technique. And, you have lots of years to work on that.
Well, that's an interesting question. As a young boy, I received a tape recorder as a Christmas present, and I was always fascinated by radio and broadcasting. I got a crystal radio set as well as a gift, and I aspired to be a hockey play-by-play guy. We always watched hockey on TV in Canada, and I got interested in harness racing through some friends who were involved in the training of the horses. And we were betters, we were patrons. We went to, I grew up not far from Greenwood Racetrack. We would go to all the tracks in Ontario on road trips and have a lot of fun and lose a lot of money. And I just got interested in I became aware of that job when I would go to the track, and I would listen intently to the announcer. And I always thought it would be a fun job and quite a challenge. And it turns out that's what it's been.
I think my interest came from going to the racetrack with my father as a kid, and I was intrigued by all aspects of the sport, obviously, but I think it was the announcer that really caught my attention. I was just totally intrigued by it and thought someday I would love to try that. So was fortunate enough to get the call when I was 17 years old. It happened very quickly. It was at the Summerside Raceway. At the time, they needed someone in a hurry, and kind of through a friend of a friend, my name came up. They said, let's give this kid a shot, and I went and actually had a tryout with a gentleman that a lot of people in Ontario would know by the name of Doc Hennessy. He and I were doing a tryout together. He didn't come back after the first night, so I guess I kind of got the job by default, and loved doing it then, and still love doing it when I get the chance.
Mom walked me into a racetrack when I was 10 years old. I fell in love with the horses instantly, and then the horse race announcer caught my ear. I was a big fan of Kevin Boomer Gallant growing up as a child, delivering newspapers. I would carry a transistor radio with me in the summertime, and race calls would be on the radio from Old Home Week in Charlottetown. If I heard the bugle on the radio, I knew it was time to stop and listen to Kevin Boomer Gallant calling the races from Old Home Week at the CDP.
Way back when I was 16 years old, which was a couple of days ago, Hanover needed an announcer, and that's kind of been my home track. I grew up just outside of town, and aunts and uncles and grandparents have and had horses, and I was around the racetrack and thought I'd give it a shot.
Well, we had a race caller down here on the island by the name of Ed Waters. I was just a kid at the time, and
And back then, you couldn't go to the racetrack without accompanied by an adult. So we had to sneak in. And I snuck in lots of times, and this guy was just absolutely amazing. And I remember one day as a kid saying, I'd like to do that. And far enough down the road, lo and behold, I got the opportunity to do it and been doing it ever since.
Well, really, I was already a big fan of the sport before I was ever an announcer. I think most announcers are. I think that's the best way to get into announcing, is be a fan, learn the sport, and have that knowledge to back you up. Because if you come in as an announcer, like say you come in from a radio station or something like that, and you're great at announcing, but you don't know anything about horse racing, you're going to have a tough time. But I knew a lot about horse racing. I did start in Lethbridge. Like I said, I was only 23 years old in 1993 when I started, but I had been a fan since I was 16. Just happened to go to the track when I was 16 years old in Regina. That's where I grew up. Me and a few of my buddies placed a $2 bet to show, like most people do when they start. Horse got third. I got $11 back. You know, the rest is history, right? I said, where's this been all my life? Easy money, free money. So started to go to the track there. It was harness racing, Queensbury Downs, long time ago. Track doesn't exist anymore. I believe it's a soccer center. But so I was a fan of the sport, moved to Lethbridge in 1991, went to some of the races there. There started to be a little bit more simulcasting, and I was watching Stampede Park, Northlands Park, that kind of thing in Alberta. Job happened to open up at Whoop Up Downs, as I mentioned, and I applied for the job simply because it was open. It was something I was interested in terms of the sport itself. I'd done a little bit of volunteer broadcasting, like just for the local cable station. They used to show minor league hockey games and a variety of things, and I did some announcing there. So I had some announcing experience, none of it paid. Definite love for horse racing. And the job was there, so I applied for it. And I've said this before in other interviews, I honestly don't think they had anybody else, and that's why they hired me. But it was, I did get the job, thankfully, and it was basically out of, just a love for the sport is the main reason why I applied.
I was introduced to it from about age 4 or 5, and constantly was in fact enthralled by the spectacle. But as I got a little older, I sort of created a mock race track in my bedroom. And I used to write names of horses on exercise books at school, and they used to think, oh, Robert's obsessed with horse racing. And as a teenager, I absolutely was. But it was particularly the announcing or the race calling, and I wanted to really get into it. So I took myself out to tracks in northeast of Victoria, which was with the state of where I was living, which is, my hometown is Melbourne. So Melbourne has a series of different racetracks. It has 4. And they rotate, they're turf races that they run. And they rotate between those 4 across a month or across the year, in fact. But it's really on the weekends that we would go to the track. So I would take my opportunities to sometimes get to country tracks on the weekend and practice, and sometimes harness tracks, whatever it was, and just listen to myself with a tape recorder, microphone, handheld, binoculars as well. And eventually someone would say, we need a person to call these trials here, and we need a person to, and it was very slow, little bits and pieces, and eventually I got part-time work regularly on the weekends. But it led to the radio station that covers horse racing, which is 3UZ at the time. They morphed into different names, but they were the racing station in the sense that if there was racing in Australia in Melbourne at any track, they sent their race callers, their announcers out to do it. And as they expanded, and they also always had country race callers and greyhound race callers and standardbred race callers, and as they expanded their service a little bit, I was called in to work for them. And they knew that I really loved the thoroughbreds, they knew that, but you didn't start with that, so they started me off on greyhounds. And I was like, oh my gosh. But I did that. So all of that to say, it was in the 80s. My real opportunity to be a full-time announcer was 89, and that led to me just staying as my income. I stayed in Hong Kong 6.5 years before I left to go overseas to North America. The opportunity has been basically what led to me living in this area for a long time now. But all to say that if you count part-time work as against full-time, and if you count childhood, I think I've always been calling races. I don't think I've ever not been calling races.
So it was your uncle that just got you interested in the first place in announcing?
Well, I'll be very honest. In high school, I got real good grades without ever studying, because 4 or 5 nights a week I was going to Lebanon Raceway in Lebanon, Ohio with him. He was the announcer there. So I started actually going to races when I was 11 or 12 years old. And so it was kind of normal to be there. I'd sit in the announcer's booth with him, and I knew what his job was and such. I never really had thoughts of being an announcer, but I think that was his goal, to get me started and go from there.
I was born and raised in Chicago, big sports fan. So not only was I aware of the great sports announcers in Chicago, but thoroughbred racing got a lot of coverage on TV. And the famous Chicago thoroughbred and harness announcer Phil Georgia was heard everywhere, including at the end of the sports segment on the CBS local news. So I grew up hearing Phil at the top of the stretch going, "Here they come spinning out of the turn." And I grew up with Jack Brickhouse, who announced Cubs games, and then later Harry Carey, who did Cubs games, and hockey announcers that were great. I was a big hockey fan and played hockey. And so you just grew up hearing announcers, and I was a sports guy, and then my maternal grandfather and great-grandfather played thoroughbreds. And, so I was familiar with it. And just one day, in addition to my fondness for harness racing, I said, I think I might want to become an announcer, and I pursued it.
I just kept saying yes. So when I called the race in 2014 as a one-off, it was a great thrill, and the adrenaline rush was wild. And I had so much fun, but I thought it was just a one-off. And for me, growing up, I never thought an announcer was the job for a woman, because I didn't see any other women doing it. I saw women as sideline reporters and paddock analysts, so I wanted to do that. So this wasn't what I envisioned, but it's kind of bigger and better than I thought it could be.
Well, as a brash young reporter in the 70s, I stepped up into radio and television, and I had a quick mastery of almost every assignment I got that came my way, except for this one called harness racing. When I first stepped up to do it, it was very difficult to master because of the aspects of harness racing and the nightly announce function, which is that you have 6-10 new names coming at you every 15 minutes. So when you do a hockey game, you have the home team, which you know with tremendous familiarity, and then you can concentrate more on the visitors. But with harness racing, it's a field of new names of 6 to 10, 12 new horses every 15 minutes. And I was fortunate to be on duty as the internet era arrived, but with that came a very, very high degree of accountability. Every race became your legacy because people were suddenly keeping VHS copies and DVD copies of your races, and then they were posted to the racetrack websites. So the long and short of it is the accountability level is intensely high, but once you've mastered the pattern and caught on to the pattern with, there's going to be a few variations, race in, race out, but it's a labor of love, and it's something you relax with, and every race you announce is going down in history to somebody somewhere.
I entered a contest back in 1993 at Flamborough Downs. The announcer at the time was a gentleman by the name of Ken Hornick, and they put out a call to any race fans who wanted to try their hands at announcing. And so I entered, and I won, and that's a bit amazing. I'll get to that story later. But after that, my family moved to Elmira, and I spent too many days trying to pick a winner at the racetrack, and I used to wander off to the track up the road often. I would tell my wife I was going for milk, and I'd return like 4 hours later. And I always threw out a note to Kelly Spencer saying I'd love to try my hand at announcing, but there just were no positions available. But Rick Ryer, who was the announcer at Hanover Raceway and is again now, Rick took over the general manager's position, and they were looking for an announcer, and Rick gave me a shot, and I really appreciate that. I was the full-time announcer at Hanover for 3 years. Had to give that up when my family moved and we started having young children, and I couldn't commit to every Saturday night. And then I found it was hard to get a gig again, and I thankfully one Sunday about 8 or 9 years later, they needed somebody at Clinton. I filled in a couple of times, and I'm so grateful that they give me a chance to keep announcing there. And this, at Clinton, I've announced, I've shared the job with some fabulous announcers, people like Ken Middleton, Greg Blanchard, this year Shannon Sugar Doyle, Frank Salive, and people who are much bigger names than myself. And I am incredibly grateful to Jessica Carnahan and Ian Fleming. They've always had me back. I try my best, and I really enjoy it there, and I'm really grateful for them giving me that opportunity. So for the last, I want to say 16, 17 years, I'm up at Clinton and doing about 6 or 7 Sunday afternoons each summer, and I have a lot of fun doing it.
Well, it was just, we used to go all the time before, and you'd go with Dad when he was covering the races. You wouldn't go with him to the press box, but you'd always go down there. And Jack Short was a longtime announcer at Hastings, and he was a family friend, and it was, you kind of got to pick his brain a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. And but it's funny, in the old days, the announcer's booth was kind of, if you want to call it, sacred. Like, you didn't go in there to visit or to see the guy. He was kind of left on his own, because they had so much to do at that point. I mean, there was no internet, there was no streaming. Basically, we used to have all the races on the radio, but it was all pre-recorded and then chopped and cut and sent down the line and played on the radio. So they were pretty busy at that point in doing things. Things have changed a little bit now with the internet and stuff going up pretty well right away on the streaming services. So it's a little bit different, but I enjoy having people in my booth. I know a lot of guys don't. To tell people about a little bit about the history of Hastings or Fraser, and at Hastings, I don't care what anybody says. I have probably the best office in the world. Yes, we're at a 5/8 track, but we have the inlet right behind us. We have Grouse Mountain, Seymour Mountain right behind us. There's no view like it. And, I've been to some other tracks too, and I have to admit that I have a pretty good vantage point. I'm outside, but even if it's raining, I really don't get a lot of weather beating in unless it's a real bad rainstorm in October. And I just enjoy that, because when you're outside, you also, it kind of gets you going and your blood going too when you're hearing the fans cheering rather than being in an isolated booth. So it's kind of a unique situation. And even when, Robert Geller and I used to do we did a thing called International Exchange. He came up and called 3 races up here, and I'd go to Emerald one day and call 3 down there and just have some fun with it. I was actually out on the landing there, which is like a catwalk, because it was so much nicer being outside rather than being in I can't call it sterile booth, but it's, there's not much atmosphere that you get from being in the booth. So, yeah, I enjoyed going outside. Even when I went to Century Mile a few times to do some, I was out on the roof, and the guys would look at me like, what are you doing? It's just so much nicer. It's just what I'm accustomed to, that's all.
We'll try to keep this on the short side. When I was in high school, we had around my sophomore year, we had a really good girls basketball team. They didn't have a PA announcer, but we had a PA announcer for the boys games. So I started doing some of the girls games then. One of the colleges that I flunked out of, I did the PA announcing for the men's and women's. That was Cumberland University in Tennessee. I did that for about half a season. And then after I decided college wasn't for me, I started DJing in nightclubs, which had a lot of vocal work and a lot of microphone stuff. So then we just kind of put my interest in horse racing and microphone skills together, and I got encouraged to do this, and here I am.
So I grew up around the sport. My family, my parents owned some horses when I was young, and literally kind of grew up around the track, and that, you know, it was fun. I was always kind of fascinated by the announcing and broadcasting side of things, and so I kind of always had that in the back of my mind that, hey, someday I might like to get into that.
The first race I ever announced was at Kawartha Downs out in Peterborough. I was writing a tip sheet for them, and I just asked them one night when I was there, I said, just for a joke, can I call a race just to see if I can do it? And they said, sure. And, you know, it went okay. And then whenever I would go out there, they'd let me call one or two, and then it just kind of developed.
Basically, being young and going to the race with my dad, just hearing his voice over the loudspeaker and everybody going crazy, it just kind of catches on pretty quickly, I guess. I thought, oh, I want to do that and do the same thing and just get everybody into it just like I did.
Well, I mean, again, I've done it all my life. This is all I've ever done is announcing, just in various forms, whether it be on air doing a regular, you know, radio announcing shift, doing a morning show. I've done news. I've done sports in different capacities. I used to work on the Winnipeg Blue Bomber broadcast on the sidelines with the legendary Bob Knuckles Irving. When he would call the ball games, I would be down on the sidelines, and guys would come off the field and their legs would be pointing in 3 different directions. I'd be the one sticking the microphone in their face and going, so does that hurt? You know, and other little interesting tidbits that you find from both of the benches. So I've done that. I've covered the Winnipeg Jets. I've had the opportunity to interview so many people in the Jets locker room, so many hockey greats over the years, covering the Jets from the press box. So, I mean, sports, I've always had a love of sports and doing it, whether I was doing the actual on-air stuff, whether I was producing it behind the scenes or whatever. So I've done announcing in some form of capacity for about 42 years now. So this was just another announcing challenge, something I'd never done before, something else to tuck under my belt and add to my resume. So when the opportunity came up for it, I was just like, absolutely. Anything that has me talking into a microphone, I absolutely love.
My interest in the sport goes back to when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. My grandfather was a person who was big into betting on other tracks when you couldn't just sit at home and do that. He would literally jump in the car and drive from Western Pennsylvania all the way down to Hialeah in Florida and back and hit every track he could in between. He would just take off for a week or two at a time and go do that. And so every year I'd go to the meadows with my grandfather and my grandmother and my parents, and I just enjoyed it. But then when I was 18 years old, I started working part-time for a guy who had a separate business that was actually a sports handicapping business, but he owned horses at the meadows. And so after work, we'd start going down there. And so I was, 18 years old and kind of getting back into it, now realizing that, this is kind of a fun sport. And that's when I ended up sending a letter to Roger looking for an internship. So announcing was never something I thought I'd do. I did kind of have an interest in working in radio back then, but I just kind of fell into the harness racing announcing job.
Well, it's funny you should ask, because I've been a racing fan since I was 4 years old, since the first time my dad took me to the races. It was always something that I wanted to do, but I ended up in a career in broadcasting. I was a news reporter, radio and TV, and then went on a bit of a hiatus and owned my own business for a couple of decades, and decided that I was working pretty hard at that business, and I wanted to go back to one of my first loves, which was broadcasting. And I thought, why not go for race announcing? And so I made a phone call, and the rest is history.
So when I was a kid, I grew up in New York. I grew up on Long Island, New York. And one of my things we used to do was go to the racetrack. I had an uncle who loved going to the racetracks and gambling at the time. This was back in, I was born in 72, so it would have been in the 70s. And so as a kid, I used to go with my dad before my dad passed away in 79. And then my family and we still would go to like Roosevelt Raceway and Monticello and Yonkers, a couple of quarter horse tracks that they had up there at the time, thoroughbred tracks. And so we would go to the off-track betting that they had up there, and they started simulcasting the races. And for the first time, I guess that would have been in the 80s, like the mid to late 80s. And so we could watch the races right there at the off-track betting. But before that, you couldn't ever watch the races. They would only pipe the race call in by telephone from each racetrack. So somebody would call seconds after the race was over with the recording, and they would play it over the speaker at the off-track betting. So I always loved that because you can envision the calls. Like the track announcers back then were very vivid in their descriptions. They were very animated, and you could get into the races that way without actually seeing them. And then when they started simulcasting, occasionally Yonkers would have issues, and they would lose sound. So I would be sitting in the off-track betting and everybody get mad. And I did a hella imitation of Bob Meyer. And so I started doing that as a kid. And they were like, look at this kid go. He's announcing just like Bob Meyer. And that's how I kind of got into it. And, I got into the horse business in 2006 after I left banking and started training my own horses and owning my own horses. And eventually I just decided I wanted to get into announcing because it's something I feel like I'm good at. And as I got to do it more, I really learned a lot. I mean, I've learned with Roger Houston and all these guys, and it's been a blessing and amazing to get to where I'm at this point.
Going to the track, I started with baseball games. A lot of people know the story, but I called Yankee games on my phone to my grandmother. She lived in Florida, so and then just being a racing fan, it just kind of transitioned over. Started calling some races off TV and picked up that I was okay at it. I mean, sure, I wasn't the best, but put some time in and called thousands of races off TV, and here we are.
It's interesting to me that even though there were 3 boys in our family, I was the only one of the 3 that ever took an interest in announcing. And all 3 of us obviously grew up with a dad who was a track announcer. And while my 2 brothers, they always respected what Dad did, it just was never something that interested them personally as a profession. For some reason, and I don't know if there's any way to explain it, I think every person is different, every child is different as far as what will catch or captivate a child, what will interest a child. And all I know is from the time I was quite young, and I'm going to say my earliest memory of my dad calling a race, I was probably 4 years old, and I remember my mom taking me to our local county fair, and my dad was announcing. And I remember from that very first experience, I was mesmerized. I maybe it was just the whole idea of hearing my dad's voice on a PA, or knowing that everybody in that grandstand was listening to my dad. Plus, harness racing, it's a bright and colorful sport. And my family, my dad was on the fair board. We had box seats right in the front row of the grandstand, and I got to see it very up close. And I mean, all of the sights and sounds just grabbed my attention. And from probably age 4, I found what my dad did as a track announcer to be incredibly interesting, and I knew that was something I wanted to do. Now, I will say this. My dad had to constantly push me out of my comfort zone. My dad would say, as I started announcing, my dad would say things like, okay, we know you can announce county fair races. Now you need to help me at the state fair. Or he would say, okay, now that you've helped me at the state fair, you need to come to Lexington and help me at the Red Mile. And I would say, no, I don't want to do that. At the time, I said, I'm happy just doing county fair stuff or whatever. And I think what my dad realized, my dad believed I had the ability to do the job. And now I'm age 54. And while I kind of resented him at times as a teenager because I felt like he was pushing me too hard, now at age 54, I look back and I realize, no, what my dad was doing, my dad did not want me to get to age 54 and look back and say, what if, or if only. My dad challenged me the way he did because he wanted me to capitalize on those experiences when I was young, and he understood that when you're young is the best time to pursue them.
I think it just goes back to my love of broadcasting, I guess you could say. I was really fascinated as a youngster growing up by the announcers on any sport, not just racing, but, I would watch hockey, basketball, baseball, and obviously you have your favorites, and you have people that, when you hear their voice, they're synonymous with certain moments or events. So that was kind of interesting to me. And then I went to school for broadcast journalism. So you got kind of the bug there, had an interest, kind of snowballed, and then I was just looking for opportunities to get involved. I'm not sure race calling was ever something that I really thought about doing. I mean, I had some fun as a kid announcing races in my head or sitting off in the corner of the track and doing my own calls, but it was never something I thought about pursuing necessarily. More or less just kind of fell into my lap a little bit, and I've had a lot of fun doing it so far.
Well, my father, I was never in the ownership aspect of it. My father was a gambler, like to gamble on the horses. And as a matter of fact, it's kind of a funny story. I don't know if you're familiar with police scanners, but my father got my grandmother one for her birthday. And he was going through the police scanner trying to get the frequencies for the particular, the actual local police department. And so he was going through these frequencies. And this is when cordless phones first came out, before cell phones, when cordless phones first came out. And I don't know how he did it, but somehow my dad intercepted a phone call, a cordless phone conversation between one person and another person. And this one person was telling this other person about how this horse could not lose at Hawthorne Thoroughbreds. And he was going off at, 20, 30 to 1 odds. And so back then there were bookie joints, there weren't OTBs. So my dad contacted my grandfather, who had a little bit of knowledge in playing races, and so they went up to the bookie joint. They bet this horse, and sure as heck the horse won easy, and they won all kind of money. And my dad said, "Oh, this is a very easy way to make money." So we started going to the racetrack, and he started taking me, and that's when I just fell in love with it. And for some reason, I fell in love with the voice, the announcer at Balmoral Park. At that time was Peter Galassi, and I just thought it was like the voice of God up there, and I just figured, that's what I want to do with my life. And lo and behold, I got lucky, and I did it.
So I got started on racing as a fan. I didn't have anybody on the other side of the game that I knew. No owners, no trainers, no jockeys. And I grew up an hour from a racetrack, so I was just a super fan, and I had to figure out how to turn my super fandom into a career. And the point given Preakness at Pimlico Racecourse was kind of the first time that I thought maybe I could, or at least would like to try to announce races, because I remember as a young teenage gambler, I was screaming at the television, "Come on, let's see the real point given." And no sooner did I yell that out loud that the race call Dave Robin gave was "point given, the real point given." So there was like that huge emotional connection, and I said, you know what? I could make connections with people the same way that he is. I would love to try that. So I went to the University of Arizona's racetrack industry program. That's where everything started.
Back in 2019, pre-pandemic, I was actually working construction, but I decided I needed to do something else. That wasn't my passion, and I wanted to go back to school. Wasn't 100% sure for what. And it all just kind of lined up. I was going back to school for some kind of writing or broadcasting, something like that. I want to do sports, because who doesn't love sports? And then just around that same time, Manitoba Harness had a little Facebook post saying that they were looking for an announcer. And I just said, wow, it's kind of weird destiny, right? Where I want to go back into sport, a sport I used to love so much as a kid. All worked out. And so, I applied to it, and actually almost didn't. I didn't even make the job interview because it was supposed to be a rain out for the qualifiers, but then they did them anyway. But then I just had to send in recordings, got the job, and rest is history, right? So
when I was 5 years old, I sat in front of my TV at home. My grandparents raised me, and my grandfather gave me a Panasonic tape recorder, and I would start broadcasting football games, baseball games, basketball games, the Kentucky Derby, into the tape recorder. Because the only thing I'd wanted to do since I was 5 years old was be an announcer. And as I gradually grew up through the years, I would continue to do things like that. And my passion for it, sometimes, you get that initial burst. You see kids in kindergarten, they write down, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a teacher, I want to do this, I want to do that. But sometimes that passion burns out, or the effort you have to put into it becomes too great for some people. In my case, I never wavered from wanting to be a sports announcer. It's the only thing I've wanted to do. When I worked at McDonald's when I was 16 and I'm working the drive-through, I'm wearing the headset talking to people like I'm broadcasting a game. You know, it's welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order, please? You know, so that was the first headset that I put on, and I made it like my little sports announcing convention in the drive-through at McDonald's at 16 years old. So I'm pretty lucky. I developed a passion for it early. That passion never wavered. I've been incredibly lucky to have people, you know, give me opportunities from a young age. Dave Johnson, who's the voice of the Washington Wizards, DC United Soccer here in our area, gave me a great chance to do a high school sports show when I was 17 years old in a station in Annapolis. And I've been incredibly lucky to be in this industry ever since, and humbled by it that I've been able to stay in it for so long, but by no means do I take it for granted either that I've had a chance to stay in it. And it's because you work with great people who teach you how to do the right things, and more importantly, how to treat people the right way through the years. Because if you're a pain in somebody's rear end in their building, they're going to get rid of you. And to me, that's the biggest thing. You got to treat people the right way. And if you do, you know, you even buy a little brownie point along the way, you know, from folks, and maybe it keeps you around a little bit longer.
I mean, racing's fun in terms of calling a race. It's like a song, right? Like there's like a build up, there's a crescendo. So you're telling a story. I don't know. I've always kind of been a fan of like fan entertainment and the production behind it. So for instance, like I've never had the voice, and this is my personal opinion, and voices are subjective, right? Like some people like announcers who are deadly accurate and, you know, whatever. I've never had the voice to be like a PA announcer at a stadium. My dad, who was an accountant, he had a client who used to be a PA announcer in Major League Baseball. And when you sit in a room with him, like the floor would shake, right? He just had that voice, and I've never had that voice. So I always knew like I couldn't ever be a stadium voice, but I've always been a fan of horse racing, right? So when I got involved in horse racing and started working in the industry, that kind of became a thing. You could just tell a story regardless of your vocal talent, as long as you are able to tell that story and build action for the fans. Like that's kind of my goal. And I'm not the greatest storyteller. I like saying goofy things because you can. I think it's wild to me, and I don't mean to be tangential or go off on a tangent. It's just wild to me. Since like social media's come around, and you're a young guy, so you're probably born into social media, just there for you. But since social media's kind of come around, there's always like attacks on announcers, right? Like I can't believe so and so missed that horse splitting horses, and that horse, the winner barely got a call. We don't have an outcome on the race. Like we don't have any. We can't change what actually happened if we call the horse wrong. So if you're saying something fun and goofy and trying to entertain fans, that's what we are, right? Like we're just part of the show. So I think every night, like when I walk past our TV room at the end of the night, I say, good show, guys. You know, like that was a good show we did tonight, because we're part of the entertainment. We're just the voice of the, you know, over the grandstand. That's kind of what we are. So that's my goal, always to kind of make things more fun and lighthearted rather than deadly accurate. That's just not me.
Well, I'm a big sports fan, so you know, I do enjoy whether it's you know, probably again on the broadcasting side. I guess when I was younger, you know, calling Hockey Night in Canada would have been like a dream kind of a job, and really do, you know, admire the sports broadcasters. And then being a big, you know, as I said, a big harness racing fan, really enjoyed, you know, as a teenager listening to, you know, the likes of Kevin Boomer Gallant and from Charlottetown, and then Vance Cameron, of course, as I got a bit older. And I'm, you know, a big fan of the PEI racing scene and go to Old Home Week every year. And so, you know, those guys, watching those guys and other announcers like, you know, like the great Frank Salive and like just different people and how they make the race, and you know, just the terminology and the way they track the horses, and just times where, you know, they turn a race into something more than just the horses. It's all about the people that are involved too, and the stories behind the scenes.
So put all those things together, and you know, I was certainly interested in giving it a shot. And then once I got into it, I was really motivated to keep at it.
I was licensed in 2015, and how this all started was back in 2015 around springtime. I used to go on the USTA site, and I still do every day, like religion, just to, you know, go over all my stuff and look at all the results and entries and just kind of see what's going around as a fan, basically. And I saw this thing for this Tom Durkin race calling thing. I clicked on that and checked that out and was reading through it. I called that number about a lot faster than this Zoom call went through. And talked to a lady, and her name was Ellen, and she got me hooked up. She said for $50 you can take a 3-hour course down here in Goshen, and you might even be able to call a race in the matinee card. And I was all in, and I went down there and did all that and got my certificate and did the fun thing. And like I said, on the 4th of July that year, I got licensed because I told the announcer that was there, Mike Carter, that I was doing such a thing. He was all excited for me. He's like, "Oh wow, that's going to be so cool." He goes, "Hey, you should come up to the booth one of these times when you're up at the track." So I said, "Yeah, I'll take you up on that." So that one Saturday, I went up there in that spring. Took me up to the booth, and I remember him asking me, he goes, "Man, you seem to be pretty hyped up about this." He goes, "How come you never attempted this, anything like that before?" Because at that time, I was in my late 30s, and I said, "Well, I always thought you had to be college educated to do this. I didn't." And he started laughing in the elevator. He was laughing at me. He's like, "You don't have to be college educated to do this." He goes, "It would help, but you don't have to be." He goes, "All you got to do is, you know the racing, you know how to say all the terminology and stuff for the racing." I said, "Yeah, I know all that stuff." So, you know, he showed me around and all that stuff. And then he said, "Hey," he goes, I'll do you a favor. He goes, "Come on up here and I'll have you call a couple of qualifying races. We'll do it offline, so to speak. I got this recorder thing on my smartphone, and I'll record you, and we'll go back and listen to the call, and we'll see how you do, and we'll get you prepared for the thing you're going to do down in Goshen." I said, "Oh, that'd be great." So we did that, and I remember the first qualifier I called. He looked at me, and when I was done, and he's like, "Hey, I thought you said you never called any of these before." I said, "Well, I never have called a race before." I said I did a lot of like fun stuff when I was, you know, a child and stuff like that, playing around with it, but never for real, you know. And I used to like bark out programs right up until last year. I would fill out programs from predominantly here in like Northfield Park and just read them off just to get used to, you know, saying names of people and horses and all that stuff, and giving out, you know, doing like mock post parades and results. Of course, I never had any races to call because I just didn't have any. And so that just kind of went from there. And I don't know, I had to learn this thing on the fly, but I've learned quick, obviously. And in these few years that I've been doing this, I've got a lot further than I thought I would.
I believe I first started announcing in 2005, kind of a sheer emergency. I really didn't have any desire to be an announcer, or I definitely didn't know what I was doing. On top of that, bad combination to start your announcing career. But I was a teller for Red Mile, and they had a situation where the guy that was the announcer was also the race secretary and general manager, among various other things. A good friend of mine named Kevin Mack, and he needed someone to run up and call the first few races of the night. You know, he was stuck in the race off, still doing the draws and whatnot. So, you know, out of sheer desperation, me being on the property, he encouraged me to go do so. And I went up and tried it. Never had practiced, never had talked to anybody that was an announcer, really. I'd set up with him on maybe a few occasions upstairs, but it was horrific. And that's how sort of my announcing career. I did embarrass myself and learning a little more about the craft, and to the point where I could at least get serviceable. But you know, that's what happened. I did a couple of years of that, just you know, fill-ins on once a week for a few races apart, and then eventually, I think out of sheer desperation, he left, and I was the only guy in the building that had ever turned on a microphone before. So I got that job that I've had, I think, on a regular basis, at least for the Red Mile, since 2007 or 8.
Well, I was born in 1970, And, that kind of put me in line. I didn't get to see Secretariat, but I did get, at the end of the decade, my first favorite was Bold Forbes when he won the Derby and the Belmont. And then obviously the next 2 years you had Triple Crown winners with Seattle Slew and Affirmed. And then Spectacular Bid came on their heels. And it was just all these great horses just kept coming one right after another. And even as far as standardbreds are concerned, I was at the Meadowlands to watch the U.S. Pacing Championship in 1979 when Abercrombie won. And I got to see him live, which was, phenomenal. And I would always watch all the races on TV, be it on CBS or on our local channel in New York. I still remember watching on Saturday nights racing from Roosevelt and Yonkers with Spencer Ross and Stan Bergstein. They would do a weekly show every half hour. I just got interested in it in a very early age, and I was very much happy to be a part of it after some time.